Chapter 8 My First Sony. When back in 1989, by the time of my first vacation up in the north, I bought myself a Sharp 939 tape recorder. I felt that my mission was almost accomplished and I had a successful life. I went to the north to make money good enough to buy me some cool Japanese stereo. That was my motivation. Before the army, if I had been asked what I wanted to do with my life and what would I want to be, I probably wouldn't be able to answer these. I wouldn't know. However, I had some vague plans outlined without much ambition though, like to be a gamekeeper or a forest ranger in some kind of preserve or forestry, or keep an apiary, just to keep away from the people and stay closer to nature. All this came from my fascination with books about nature, dating back to school from reading Jack London and Seton Thompson, and from bed tours. From the books about animals, I would jump to general biology and ethology and get carried away, especially with ecology, when the term ecology was not being used as widely as it is now. Meanwhile, a year before the army, the military office sent me to a heavy vehicle driving training school, and in the army I was assigned to fully tracked ATS and later to a GTT vehicles, which I sometimes drove, especially in springtime break-up seasons when the ordinary vehicles couldn't be used. It was when it first came to my mind that I could drive those tractors up in the north of Siberia and make big money. Before that, I had never dreamed about the big money as my cousin always did. I didn't go to the north right after the army, not even intended to. Instead, I took a job as a mechanic in a garage of road construction machines. But the idea of an apiary had never left me, and I even had yet my another cousin carried away with this idea, who, unlike me, was lighter on his feet, and off he went to a beekeeping school of some sort. And he, who had worked as an oilman in Siberia and a sailor in the Far East, and had almost got himself enlisted to become a prospector somewhere, now still keeps bees and makes good money out of it, while I was metalworking daytimes, and in the evening I studied to become a shovel operator. Besides hard working, I was still interested in photography, and with my very first paycheck, I bought a good enlarger for 40 rubles. I was using my father's old Soviet FED camera, which, as I know now, was the famous Leica camera's replica, which I recently threw away, by the way. I wasn't that crazy about the music yet then. I had nothing to play back the music on, and I was planning to buy a shortwave transistor radio such as either Ocean or VEF, of which I had dreamed since my childhood. Besides, I wanted to listen to broadcasts in English because in the army I found my passion for English, which I hadn't given up yet, and kept working on it for 2 hours every night. By the way, there is a well-known Petergors Institute of Foreign Languages, but I was not going to join it. I wouldn't have passed the audition anyway. There is no way I would have gotten a good reference from the army. The political officer signing off my statement of charges personally promised me that he would see to that. It was stupid, of course, I see it now. But back then I thought it was the right decision that I was not going to get any higher education. My father's example wasn't being too inspiring to me, but I wanted to break myself out of poverty for a change instead. My father wasn't insisting much on me for studying, but Mom, however, kept drumming on this into my ears. But I did not give up on English and worked hard, continuing to strain my eyes. By the way, I messed up my eyes so much that in the north I was rejected by the medical board, and no way could I operate an excavator with my eyes that bad. I mean, my glasses I was about to start wearing wouldn't even help. Well, that was still 2 years ahead for that to happen. In the meantime, I was still metalworking, and soon enough I finally bought myself Speedola, a portable shortwave radio I paid almost all my monthly salary for. Electronics used to be very expensive in USSR. It wasn't as cool as the VAF radio was, but it was cheaper with fewer receiving frequency ranges. It was good enough for me to tune to anything I needed. Well, I could read English well, as I thought, but I was frustrated I couldn't get anything of what I was hearing from the radio in English. Still, every night I was listening to BBC or VOA stations until I'd fall asleep and woke up in the morning with Voice of Russia in English running on. Years later, I gave this radio as a keepsake to the guys in the oil field when I was leaving the booster pump station for interpreting. 5 years later, I was back on that field again translating for Western drillers, and I visited the station to say hello to the guys. They recognized me, even remembered the Speedola. One of my former teammates had drunk it away. Anyway, after the radio, I bought Vega, a record player combined with a tape recorder, with speakers on teak, and I was so happy about that until one day, with my cousins, I wandered into a pawn shop and saw the Japanese tape recorders in there. Fuck me good. I was amazed at both the tape recorders and the price tags on them. I could hardly recognize the tape recorders in these futuristic products. Those handbag-like luxury dual cassette tape recorders of unimaginable shapes and sizes looked fantastic compared to those Soviet loose-sided boxes, miserably decorated with rows of keys, along with lone primitive dial gauges and swinging cassette holders and black speaker lattices. A completely different level of quality and appearance immediately rushed into my eyes. You see, even in high school I broke up with my illusion of our socialistic advanced system we lived in and on which the Soviet media kept constantly reminding us. I'm not going to write here on how I was letting go of my illusions. I wrote about it somewhere about how I was arguing with my father and cousins. If I find it, I'll make a separate chapter on this. Saying to my father, a dedicated member of the Communist Party, that socialism was a dead end, dead limitation of a society. I'm not going to write about how right I turn out to be, on how surprisingly fast the life itself has shown us all the collapses of all that socialism shit. I had already known that all the electronics, clothing and cars, anything that we were interested in, were being made much better abroad, even in some countries like Czechoslovakia and Hungary, our socialist brothers. Legends were circulating about the Japanese stuff. Those of us who are old enough perhaps remember of the alleged 25 years warranty period for Japanese tape recorders. Or the supposedly ultra-drenched epoxy resin filled ups inside the tape recorders for the protection of electronic know-how and durability. Besides, the know-how had allegedly been protected by the fact that when you try to open a tape recorder, it either will fly apart or get burned down, so those marvelous know-hows were reliably protected. These were the rumors running around among the common people to whom this stuff was not available. So, seeing these tape recorders in the pawn shop only strengthened my belief that all of this was true. They looked even better than I had ever imagined. There were a lot of new brand names for me such as Toshiba, Hitachi, Aiwa, Sanyo, Pioneer, besides the names I already had known such as Sony, Panasonic and Akai. From that moment on, I knew I would never buy anything made in the Soviet Union, ever. But the price! I would have to be working for the whole year just to buy the cheapest one displayed there. The fact was the tape recorders were getting into our pawn shop shelves from the Berezka, the government-owned retail stores chain, or were brought by sailors from abroad and sold at prices 10 times more expensive than the official, set by the state prices, which in turn were 2 or 3 times more expensive compared to internationally established prices. Those recorders' prices were comparable to Zaporozhets, the light vehicles made in Ukraine, and a lot more expensive than even the best Soviet heavy motorcycles. These were real luxuries, and those who owned such tape recorders were very proud of that. However, these owners were also the objects of undesired attentions and often were subject to being robbed. And I, from then on, had my first credo in my life: to get me a tape recorder. A fucking real one. Any recorder as long as it was Japanese. Now I had a bee in the bonnet. From then on, I would regularly visit those pawn shops just to longingly stare at these beauties and listen to their sounds as they were playing back tunes. I must say that while this country was getting charged up by the acceleration campaign and had already been pregnant with the perestroika one, there was a noticeable increase in the numbers of those soiled consignment shops. Originally conceived for the sale of second-hand goods, these stores were the only way to legally sell the imported products of high demand and market prices, which the prices included all the extremely inefficient socialist economy costs, thus causing prices to grow tenfold at least, and were simply not affordable for persons like me. These were reasonable prices for the distorted economy. Any goods of high demand would rush into a whistling whirlpool of pawn stores, thus eroding the holes in the dams of the Soviet economy. I like the way I have just put it. Very good. The numbers of such shops were increasing primarily in and around the city markets. Once during one of these visits I saw a strange tape recorder. It stood out from the rest at an affordable price. Mere 450 rubles, just a little more than 2 of my monthly salaries. I had already been working as a pile-driving rig operator and made a lot more money than I used to as a mechanic. The recorder was a very old one. Even judging by its design appearance, it must have been manufactured 15 years before at least. But it still was a Sony. That's it. They would never have broken down had they been 10 or 20 years old. Everybody knew that the Japanese tape recorder warranty was 25 years, period. Shortly before that, I went to see Oleg, my classmate, who was a sailor and happened to be home on leave. He had just sailed our polar circle during navigation and had already made plans soon to start sailing across the border. So Oleg had bought him a Sharp 700 tape recorder, and I came to take a look and listen to these and, well, have Oleg record some of the tunes for me on that thing. Oleg copied me an AC/DC 1979 The Highway to Hell. He had on his open reel tape and some of the Black Sabbath 1983 Born Again stuff. I even had bought a special Japanese Denon compact cassette for that, which was of very short supply, by the way. Now I had this recorded tape, a reference one, and I use it to test the quality of other records to compare with mine. And I constantly listen to it. I still remember its melody. Well, I thought it was a melody back then. I learned from Oleg that Yura had a real heavy hitter, a Sharp 800. But I wouldn't want to go to see Yura, who had never been friends. And the prices of these recorders were outrageous. For me, anyway. And here we go. In a pawn shop, I saw at last something more or less affordable for my budget. Even this kind of money was still a big issue for me, and I had no slightest idea where would I get them. But it was still much less than the typical price of 15 to 2500 rubles. Well, I kept going to that shop, and a tape recorder kept resting on a shelf collecting dust. Nobody seemed to need it much, and its price once dropped down to 350. Wow, that was it. I had to set things going or it would be gone, and I took action. I had only 140 rubles on me, and I had to find the rest as fucking up. The very possibility of owing the Japanese tape recorder had gotten me drunk, and I did not want to miss such an opportunity. but it was almost 2 weeks before my payday. There was no question of waiting. No way. There were a lot of young and hungry men like me roaming around, ready to buy a Walkman for 200 rubles. That was about $300 according to the official exchange rate. And here it was, a real Japanese deck for an affordable price. I borrowed 120 from my mom and rushed out to collect the rest from my friends. Once in a lifetime, probably everyone had such an experience of borrowing money. And probably you know how it works, especially when money is urgently needed. No one would have any money for you, not the closest friends of yours. It was my mother's old friend whose parents once rented out their house to my parents long before, who helped me out. As soon as I had collected the required amount of money, the very next day, I could hardly wait for the lunch break. I hit the road for the pawn shop. And there I was. Just imagine now that you are a young man buying the latest iPad and having gotten muzzy in a queue for it. That was exactly me back then, surrounded by the onlookers and happy checking the tape recorder. This recorder had been equipped with a compact cassette and a headphone. I had brought my cassette with me, the one with the reference recordings. The recorder was old, all right, so old that it had a deep groove on the recorder's head. I noticed it later, not when I was buying it. Everything worked just fine. It was not possible to check its recording mode though. There were no RCA cords for that. Another terrible shortfall at the time, and we only used European DIN cable with the 5-pin connectors. Some were embarrassed by the lack of recording level adjusters. It had self-adjustable recording level controls, and no owner's manual whatsoever. I remember a short magic word Sony with a smaller Sony quarter inscription on its front panel. I did not remember its exact markings years later. I could not find it on the internet. I could find a similar kind, but not exactly this one. And once again, I who had tried hard to find it for many years, typed Sony quarter TC and then 3-digit numbers in series starting with 110 and adding up the number one by one with my every attempt, and bingo, at number 122 I found it. It had turned out to be produced somewhere between 1970 and 1973. That meant it could have been 17 years old by the time I bought it. It had already been a vintage. As you can see in this picture, this deck was a wooden case with a cupboard bottom with rubber pads fastened with screws to its chassis corners and a cheap plastic face. Back then we had our vacuum tube radio backside similarly covered with perforated cardboard. Anyway, after a thorough checkup, I, so joyful, counted my money to pay. What the fuck? I was 1 ruble short. I counted again. That's right, I had only 349 rubles on me. It was a disaster. It would take at least half an hour for me to get to work to get that fucking ruble I needed. Should I ask them to put it off? Would they just sell it to me and I bring the missing ruble right after the work hours that very afternoon? The next morning? Wouldn't it work? Why not? I swear I would bring it. No? The sales ladies were relentless, and I was scared to leave the tape recorder I almost bought. I was paranoid that somebody would take it away. I desperately tried to convince the sellers, but no way would they yield to me. The Soviet trade system, besides being crass, ineffective, and unfriendly to people, completely lacked any kind of flexibility. The system, for what it lacked in efficiency, in a strange way it made up for kindness of ordinary people. Seeing my desperation, an unknown lady approached me and gave me that 1 ruble I desperately needed. I was saved. A saleswoman, however, inquired how would I return the ruble to her, as if it was her business anyway. The woman just smiled and waved it away. I, being touched by her sympathy and understanding, and deliriously happy at the same time, said just thank you, as warmly as I could to her. Now I was the owner of the Japanese tape recorder. I was overwhelmed. I never have felt such a strong pleasure from purchasing a thing, even when I was buying the gorgeous Sharp 939, my next big deal, a car or an apartment. That was a real event for me. When, some years ago, I was selling away my first laptop on my garage sale, the one that had been delivered to me from America almost 2 decades before, to a young man, a teenager, I saw how he was excited and all burning up with impatience when I was showing it at work to him. I saw that those 1,500 rubles for which I sold him my ancient Toshiba Tikra must have been borrowed as urgently and with as much of trouble I had years before, and 15 rubles out of this money must have been spent on a jitney car. He was shy because of that. I saw how badly this young man wanted this laptop, even the well-used up one I had, but cheap and of a real brand. And I wanted that tape recorder even more back then, and I finally had it. How I was listening to it. Back at home, I immediately hooked it up to Vega, and now I constantly had it playing back whenever I was home. The real challenge for me was now to get high-quality recordings to enjoy these recorders' potential. But I was thrilled if I managed to have them recorded somewhere. Even Sony's worn-out recording head produced an incredible sound never attained by Vega. Soon I found the recordings done with its head, however, were not so good. All the high frequencies were cut off. It was okay. One day I figured I would have its head replaced when I find a suitable one. After a while, out of pure curiosity, I made up my mind to open the tape recorder up. I unscrewed and removed its rubber pads and the cupboard bottom. I had already a suspicion that the Japanese recorders neither burn down nor fly apart if you open them up. There was nothing particularly different from its USSR analogs inside. Well, given the fact that I was comparing the 70s Japanese versus the 80s of the Soviet ones. Yes, of course. It had excellent build quality. It had compact, denser arranged capacitors, resistors, diodes, and transistors, neat wiring and shielding. The tape drives were precisely fit. Yeah, a cat may look at a king, and the Japanese were not the aliens who have made these. These were the people just like us, except more disciplined. I experienced years later when I opened my first cars, the Nissan Primera I bought in 2004, hood. Same engine, a radiator, an air cleaner, nothing overly special, yet it looked all better. The same people assembled it, except it was made in Great Britain. Now we have Japanese car manufactured in Russia. They are as good as the Japanese ones. When I went up to the north, I took this tape recorder with me, and up there in the north it continued to please me with music. At first, before I had an amplifier, the Soviet Vega again, I was listening to it through my headphones. It sounded better than any Walkman I heard and as good as any Soviet decks, such as Mayak or even Vega. Well, maybe its background noise was slightly louder, but my Sony didn't have any noise cancellation feature whatsoever, and it was much better on its quality of frequency response. My collection of high-quality recordings grew, all recorded with good recorders on the Japanese compact cassettes. The Korean ones were yet to come along. I had some friends in recording studio, which we had so many across the country back then. We had no copyright concept in this country then, and there were no ideological constraints any longer that could have any effects in this country, so I had rock music new releases pretty fast and of pretty decent quality. However, some of my new friends who owned some really cool Japanese stuff, People up in the north used to earn significantly more money than anyone in the rest of this country, made fun of my old tape recorder, but I saw this as a plus. It meant that it would unlikely be stolen. It didn't look as impressive as a modern tape recorder would, but when I finally had replaced its recording head with a sandust one, albeit made in the Soviet Union, they stopped making fun of it. They saw the difference. My Sony now was capable of making recordings of incredible quality. People would come now to me to have tunes recorded on their cassettes with my recorder. I could have made good money on this, but I didn't. For a good man, I would record music for free. I would find new friends, the music lovers instead. Of course, a cool modern deck produced less noise, recorded and played back probably better than mine. But not much better. Psychologically, mine playback and recording performance was as good as this, but it was much better than any coolest portable ghetto blaster in this town up in the north. Probably even better than that flagship Sharp 939 I had bought for my first vacation. Now I listen to my Sony connected to that Sharp and never been happier, but I could no longer bet my bottom dollar on my Sharp safety. These things have actively been stolen those days. My dorm roommate bought a Soviet VCR the other day. He had only one day to enjoy it. We watched the action and porn movies on his VCR all night long, and the very next day it was gone for good. Fortunately, I bought my Sharp just before my vacation and never left it alone. I would even take it to work with me. And I brought it home to vacation, and the first thing I did on vacation, I showed my Sharp off to my cousin Ruslan, demonstrating its fantastic auto-reverse feature worked, as well as its sleep and alarm clock timer modes, and programmable pause searches and other bells and whistles it had. Ruslan stared at it, and then, after a long silence, he suddenly asked me, "Is it yours?" Of course it was mine. Whose else would you think? Now I had the best portable dual cassette recorder in my hometown. It was cooler than a Lake Sharp 700 with its speaker peak power of merely 36 watts. It was even cooler than Euro Sharp 800 with its only 80 watts. Mine was the Sharp 939 with its legendary 200 watt speakers. Of course, there must have been better tape recorders in this town. Sure, but none of my friends had anything like this. Now I could invite friends and party. And party I did. My Sharp was positioned though as a portable boombox device, but with its weight of more than 10 kg, it was way too big to carry it around. It was resting at home wired with my unrivaled Sony and always running on and on and on. Sometimes recording music and playing back mostly. I was now bringing more and more foreign-released vinyl LP discs. Back in 1989, CDs had just started coming along here in the USA and were very expensive, with rock music, and now I had an opportunity to make the first copy of reference quality records. Many, I bet, in my position would not have missed such an opportunity to make money. I could not take money for it from people I knew. It didn't feel ethical to me. I was just gladly making high-quality recordings for my friends and myself. And then I was listening. How I was listening to the music I had recorded. Now I am just unable to listen to music the way I used to. It wasn't just listening. It was some sort of submerging into it. I was easily getting stirred by the reproduced hi-hat nuances, ringing cymbals and the bass drums, or the guitar howls. Now I don't listen to any music at all. I try, but it never works on me anymore, except to some of my own just newly created ones before I upload and forget them. Listening to music on that deck, I would wonder sometimes if there were ways to reduce the hissing noise on it. Some hotshot people said that this was probably due to the worn-out motor interference inductions, and it must be replaced. In a radio repair shop up in the north in 1990, they said they could do it. I had them replace the recording head and thus radically improved my Sony's performance. I went for it. It was my big mistake. I mean, there was less hissing noise, all right. I couldn't have been happier. But not for long. There were a lot of repair shops back then. The quality of our products guaranteed to keep them busy. So I brought my deck in for repair, waited patiently for almost a month, missing it badly. Finally, I brought it back home to my dorm room and eagerly turned it on. There was less noise. 15 minutes of blissful euphoria, and all of a sudden a tape drive slowed down. The deck moaned and stopped. Puzzled, I touched it. It responded by playing again. After 5 minutes, the same thing happened again. I should immediately have grabbed the tape recorder in my arms, got some of my fellow gangsters I shared my room with, the roaring 90s were coming in, and brought it back to the shop to get them quickly to fix what they had messed up. That's what I always did ever since. I kept banging on the recorder instead to get it playing, each time banging harder and harder until it stopped responding at all. I took it with both hands and slammed it on the floor so hard that its upper front panel came off. For no particular reason, probably just to see the tape now won't play for sure, I pressed the play button. The goddamn thing started playing now, and went on playing back without any slowdowns and stops, with all its intestines exposed now. A roommate came to see what the hell was going on, and I was infuriated by the fact that I had to break the tape recorder apart to get it playing. It was still running. I grabbed it, and I probably would have thrown out of the window, but the guy stopped me. "You better give it to me," he demanded. "Take the fucker away," I snapped back to him. And he took it. I was furious, and I have never seen it again. Probably it had been fixed and kept pleasing someone else now. Or it may have been sold for parts, I wouldn't know. A few years later, I dreamt of it once. It was brand new, and when I woke up, I keenly felt how I missed it, and that I would have given a lot to find the same deck. I confess that I can easily get attached to things. It was very hard for me to part with the car when I sold it. Now, as I said, I don't listen to music much, and when I do, I use a smartphone for it. But I would never sell my first CD player, Pioneer PD S703, I owned since 1996, which for the first 8 years had continuously pleased my ears. And now I'm just pleased to see it. So I keep it. But even my affection for the CD player is nothing compared to the affection I felt for my ancient Sony Coder TC122 tape recorder deck I had once.